All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All of the, I guess, people that have decided to come and join us here on this virtual platform here this afternoon. Welcome to the Cando virtual National Links to Learning virtual forum. My name is Al Crawford. I come to you originally from the Big Stone Cree Nation, but I make my home in Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Alberta. Just want to make mention of a little bit of our notes for today. Again, National Links to Learning is in partnership with the Procurement Assistance Canada and others, and it aims to deliver a dynamic technical training forum. So, focus on knowledge sharing and skill enhancement among ECDev practitioners at the community level. So with that, the topics to come are accredited training Cando, the Cando certification, and Invest in Canada. Those will be taking place, I believe, in the next few weeks. Just a little bit of housekeeping. As always, you're more than welcome to use the raise hand function when wanting to speak. Do grab some water before we start. Feel free to use a notepad in case you would like to take notes. And as always, there will be a monthly $100 gift card draw for doing the evaluation. And that'll be sent out after each session. So we encourage all of you to do that as your input is really valuable to Cando. So with that, today's session is empowering Indigenous participation in the management of wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels, or WAHVs, I guess, waves, WAHV. And so, as always, we like to use acronyms. It's the best way to, when we have a long title like that, to kind of just, I guess, make it easier for all of us. So with that, this will cover the definition of WAHVs, waves. It's an overview of the scale of the WAHV problem in Canada, which government organizations are currently tasked with managing this issue. So the presentation will discuss the history of the Cando and Canadian Coast Guard, um, that it's a pilot project to enhance Indigenous community capacity in managing this issue. And so with that, our speaker for today will be none other than Mr. Ryan Cutler. And I'm going to just introduce Ryan a little bit here before we get started with our formal agenda and allow him to kind of take this virtual stage, we'll call it, and start his presentation. So with that, Ryan Cutler was born and raised in the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw people and has spent the majority of his career working in remote First Nation communities throughout BC. His background in engineering and business and his experience living and working in First Nations communities um, have led him to seek out pragmatic but community-focused solutions to the issues that we all face. Recently, he has been working with South Vancouver Island First Nations on a pilot project to manage and address the issue of wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels that threaten our coastline. So Ryan originally obtained to his SVOP certifications to be able to volunteer as an ambulance boat operator, and he continues to connect with Salish territory on his expedition kayak and by surfing, fishing, diving, and spearfishing whenever he has time. So with that, let's welcome Mr. Ryan Cutler, and again, thank you for joining us today. And he'll be doing the presentation on WAVs or waves. So. Whenever you're ready there, Ryan, take it away.
All right. Thanks for the great introduction, Al. And yeah, WAV versus Wave. It's an ongoing discussion in the community about which is the appropriate pronunciation of the acronym. Um, as Al mentioned, we're going to be talking today about a project that Cando's been working on for a number of years. In partnership with the Canadian Coast Guard, and it's on empowering Indigenous community participation in the management of wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels. Um, but I just wanted to point out for anybody that's not in a coastal community here that this presentation is going to have some good information for you. First of all, wrecked, abandoned, hazardous vessels occur on all of the coasts, but also in every province. So if you've got a navigable waterway in your province or in your area, there might be a wrecked, abandoned, hazardous vessel that's preventing you from using that waterway in a way that you might want to. The other, and I think more important way that I hope this presentation connects with people that might not be in a coastal community or might not be as affected by this particular issue is around the idea of stewardship teams and the capacity that's developed by those stewardship teams, and what are the economic development opportunities that we might see coming out of some of that uh, coming out of that capacity. So, as a quick introduction, again, thanks Al for that. My name is Ryan Cutler. I was born in Snuneymuxw, in the territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and I continue to live, work, and play in Coast Salish and Nuu-chah-nulth territory. And I just want to say right off the bat, if you do have any questions or comments as we go, let me know. Let's stop and have a bit of a discussion and figure out which pieces you might want to hear a little bit more on. I'm going to rely on the moderators a little bit, maybe to let me know if they see a hand up, because I'm busy in presenter mode here in PowerPoint. So with that, let's get right into it. So what we will be discussing today is what is a WAHV and why do the definitions matter? We're going to take a quick look at the legislation that governs this topic and what are the pros and cons of that legislation. We're going to have a look at the life cycle of a WAHV and see how communities can get involved at each stage of that life cycle. We're going to talk about working or partnering with government agencies. We're going to talk about leveraging local knowledge, building stewardship teams, and using that and using advanced technology and what economic development opportunities might come from that. Another one of the really key topics that we're going to discuss today is the idea of collecting and managing Indigenous data. We'll talk about OCAP, fair and care principles, and we'll talk a little bit about what data should be shared, for the purposes of the benefit of the community, and what data shouldn't be shared. What stuff makes sense to keep with Indigenous knowledge keepers in your own community. So, with all that said, why are we really gathered here today? Canada's coastline is blessed with some of the richest and most abundant marine ecosystems on the planet. For countless generations, these ecosystems have supported the health and vitality of the people that have inhabited and cared for these lands and waters. Today, we're here to discuss wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels, which present a threat to these ecosystems and also to the people and communities that rely on these resources. So specifically, wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels have led to the destruction of ecosystems, the loss of Indigenous food sources, the loss of wildlife, loss of livelihoods. We've had vessels that have been left in culturally important locations and have impacted traditional, traditional and ceremonial activities. We've seen the destruction of culturally significant sites. One of the examples is Comox Nation on the east side of Vancouver Island has traditional fish traps located along the shore. And there have been wrecked, abandoned, hazardous vessels that have come and destroyed some of that history. WAHVs can also present a threat to human health, an impact on aquaculture. WAHVs have actually forced people to have to relocate and evacuate because of the oil spills and the impact on local food sources and the health and vitality of that area. WAHVs can also present a danger to navigation and also impact or restrict fishing and collection activities. So these are some of the specific impacts that have come from wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels. But I just want to shout another reminder, if you're not from a coastal community, there's all kinds of human activities that can lead to these, types of threats and types of hazards. Think about what your own community is doing. Do you have a stewardship team? What is your own community doing to either monitor or change or restrict some of these threats and hazards? So what is a WAHV? So the WAHV, it's an acronym for wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels. I also included the definition of a dilapidated vessel. It's one of the criteria that can change the way that a vessel of concern is handled, and which government agency actually gets involved in cleaning it up or managing it. So as a general rule, the Canadian Coast Guard would be primarily involved in the management of an ongoing marine emergency. So that's an active wreck, the emission of hazardous materials, hazardous substances, oils, fuels, that kind of thing. Whereas Transport Canada is involved in dealing with legacy wrecks, abandoned vessels, dilapidated vessels that don't pose an immediate or imminent threat to the environment or to the area or to the community. So, a hazardous vessel is a vessel, any condition or threat that may reasonably be expected to result in harmful consequences to the environment, coastline, shoreline, infrastructure, or any other interests, including health, safety, well-being, and economic interests of the public, including safe navigation. That's a pretty broad statement, and it's meant to be broad to give the government agency the authority to go and deal with that as it's happening in real time. And that'd be mostly Coast Guard doing that. A wrecked vessel is a vessel or any part of a vessel that is sunk, partially sunk, adrift, stranded, or grounded, including on the shore. It can also mean equipment, cargo, and any other thing that was on board a vessel and that has sunk, partially sunk, is adrift, stranded, or grounded. An abandoned vessel is one where a vessel is, or there's no evidence of anybody maintaining or coming to the vessel for 2 years. That seems like a really long time to me, and it kind of surprises me that that's the way that it takes 2 years for some of these vessels to be considered abandoned. So if you've got a vessel that's just at anchor and it's been there for a year, it's really not doing anything wrong. And that's a problem for many communities that see these floating disasters out in front of their territory and are worried about the consequences. For a little bit, and the final one is the derelict or dilapidated vessels. And though that's any vessel that has been significantly degraded, dismantled, or is unsafe to be used for navigation. And that changes that definition is important because it changes that time span from 2 years down to 60 days, so 2 months. If you see a vessel that's obviously not in any kind of state to be used to get around on the water, then you can take action on that a little bit more quickly. The risk that's presented by a WAHV can vary dramatically. So at the high end of the spectrum, you could find a large commercial vessel with a substantial load of fuels, lubricants, hydraulic oils, and many other noxious chemicals. At the lower end of the risk spectrum, you might find a small sailboat with no motor that's located in a good anchorage. Yeah, and each of those vessels gets handled a little bit differently by the government agencies that manage it. So talking, I'm just going to get in a little bit to the legislation. So the WAHV Act is the Canadian legislation that governs WAHV. It was updated, got a major update in 2019. And one of the key changes is that it makes the vessel owner responsible for the full life cycle of the vessel, including any and all costs associated with the vessel's end of life. So this is where it's important to note that difference in responsibility between Coast Guard and Transport Canada. So the end-of-life vessels generally aren't posing the big hazard, so they generally fall into Transport Canada authority. One of the big problems that we're currently seeing on the coast and across Canada is that the system that registered vessels to owners is incomplete. Many vessels get bought and sold many times without having a change in the registered owner. And that makes it really difficult to hold vessel owners responsible when they sink or when they cause damage to local ecosystems. So one of the things that's being considered by Transport Canada is to move to a vehicle or move to a system of registration that's a little bit more like your car, where the process of buying or selling that vessel or vehicle gets attached to something that's a little bit more concrete and is part of that buying and selling process. Here we're going to talk just a really quickly about that split mandate between Coast Guard and Transport Canada. Um, so Coast Guard is generally the first point of contact if you're going to report a wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessel. Coast Guard will go out and do a risk assessment and decide whether or not to deploy assets to address that vessel. And that'll only be if it's an immediate threat. And if it isn't, then it'll get passed on to Transport Canada's jurisdiction. If you have a look at this Government of Canada infographic, what is noticeably absent from the chart is how a vessel gets removed from the water, dismantled, and disposed of appropriately. Unfortunately, there is no such group or government organization in the Canadian government. The current process relies on communities or non-government organizations to take control of these vessels and dispose of them accordingly. We have heard from some of the members of government that they're looking to change some of these some of the way that this works, but currently there just isn't a government agency that's tasked with dealing with this problem. And why is that important? Well, let's have a look at what has changed over the last 20 years or so. So on the left, you can see a picture of Brentwood Bay. That's in Finlayson Inlet, southern Vancouver Island, on the east side of the Sandwich Peninsula. In 2024, you can see that there's a few vessels anchored in the area or anchored in the bay, but it's not, an overwhelming amount. And you can see in the last 20 years that essentially the entire bay, anywhere that you can drop an anchor within that bay, now has a vessel anchored there. Some of these vessels aren't causing any problems. They're well-maintained vessels that are obeying all of the laws and regulations. But of course, a percentage of them are fall into that category of abandoned vessels or derelict vessels, vessels that aren't being maintained properly and present a huge risk to the community. One of the things that we don't see in this picture is, all of the traditional use sites that are here. I've had a chance to speak directly with the stewardship manager of Sartlip First Nation, which is the nation that Brentwood Bay, or nation whose territory Brentwood Bay is in, and had a chance to speak with him about the numerous cultural sites, traditional use sites, ceremonial sites, and burial sites that they are uncomfortable accessing. They might not want to draw attention to or highlight, but their traditions and their ceremonies are being impacted by the just dozens and dozens and dozens of vessels that are scattered about their territory. Now I'm going to get into a little bit about how Cando got connected with this and why we think it's important. So this was originally started as a strategic partnership initiative between Cando and Transport Canada. Cando is engaged to identify essentially the procurement opportunities. So what Indigenous businesses might be able to be created in order to participate in the management of this problem. So we started engaging with some communities and listening to them and finding out what their priorities were around this topic. And what we heard was that it really wasn't around that final bit of the process of removing the vessels from the water and dismantling them that the community wanted to be involved in, because they saw that as too late. The communities that we spoke with wanted to be, wanted to have a seat at the decision-making table early in the life cycle of the WAHV. And so although those procurement and economic development opportunities are appreciated and important, it was really the stewardship and environmental protection that was the focus of the nations that we engaged with. So through that initial partnership, we worked with a number of coastal First Nations, and we engaged some government organizations and some technology partners as well. So we started talking and working a little bit more closely with Canadian Coast Guard, And we also had the opportunity to work with an amazing Canadian technology company called Barnacle Systems. They developed a really cool device for yacht owners to be able to monitor their vessels when they weren't aboard the yacht. And Coast Guard actually worked with Barnacle to develop a stripped down version of the product that could be placed on a wrecked, abandoned, hazardous vessel to monitor it and reduce the risk profile that vessel presented. We also had the chance, or we also worked to map out the existing government processes and identified a bunch of holes in those processes that we're continuing to make recommendations to government and work within government to change. We also had the chance to identify a bunch of capacity and skill technology gaps and overlaps. So the overlaps were amazing, but there were a few holes that we identified as well. More on that in a minute here. And then we also developed some training to help inform coastal communities about how they could get involved and what they could do. So here's some of the results from that pilot process. In the top left, you can see the Sauk Nation Marine Team out doing some risk assessment on wrecked, abandoned, hazardous vessels in their territory. In the top right, there's some cool pictures from the drone team from Shianu First Nation. The bottom left is an image of Brentwood Bay. Sartlet First Nation, as I mentioned, they have been working with a bunch of GIS mapping and things like that to identify the resources, traditional use areas, food sources, and environmental risks in their area. Bottom center there is that's the Barnacle device. So that's a little marine suitcase that you can place on a wrecked, abandoned, hazardous vessel. And then bottom right is an example of a wrecked, abandoned, hazardous vessel that washed ashore in Sauk Nation territory, and the Sauk Nation, deployed their team to manage that hazardous material spill. So based on that, what we found when we looked at the existing community was an immense amount of widely relevant skills and capacity, knowledge, technology to be able to participate in the management of wrecked, abandoned, hazardous vessels throughout their life cycle. And so while WAHV is the specific example we're taking for this particular presentation, I'd like you to take a minute, think about your own community. What kind of stewardship efforts are ongoing in your community? What capacity and skills are being developed by those stewardship teams? And what are the government agencies that you might be able to partner with or thinking about connecting with that might be able to make use of that data and make use of that capacity that has been developed by these stewardship teams? So I talked a little bit about the different teams here, and so just on a tiny pocket of southern Vancouver Island, we found marine teams with really advanced knowledge of just conducting maritime response activities. We found a community with an advanced drone team that can be used for surveillance and data collection. We found another community that had this the GIS mapping capacity to be able to do some work to think about, if a risk happened in one area, how that might change relative to that risk being in another area. So there's this tremendous amount of capacity that has been developed and exists in these communities that as of today might not have made all of those connections to where they might be able to find the economic development opportunities that exist within that capacity. So just something to keep thinking about. So again, thinking about the drones, the community marine teams, the GIS mapping, all of these activities, they create data and information. And so to ensure that community data could be effectively integrated into the Coast Guard decision-making process around these vessels, we started with the Coast Guard pattern of response. So what happens when they get a report? So it starts with identification. It moves on to notification. So they'll notify the responders in the area and maybe the community, maybe not. That'll go on to a risk assessment. And through that risk assessment, they'll decide whether or not they need to respond. If they do need to respond, then they go into asset activation. So that's sending out boats, helicopters, whatever kind of assets or teams might be appropriate to respond to that initial notification. Then you go through the response operations, and then you get into the post-incident activities. So cost recovery, lessons learned, and that kind of thing. So to make sure that the community data that was collected had a place to go and had somewhere to land, we needed to understand what Coast Guard was doing. And so this is basically how we did it, how we mapped out what Coast Guard does, and we mapped in, what community capacity is available. And so what we found is that literally at every stage of the process, coastal communities are in many ways actually, more able to conduct these activities than Coast Guard is. When we look at identification, notification, being in that community, seeing it firsthand, being first on the water to notice, and having those communication pathways available to do those notifications. We've got in community really experienced mariners that are able to do complex risk assessments on these vessels to understand whether activating response resources is required or not. We've also got advanced marine teams that have capacity to deal with marine environmental spills or respond to lost persons or things like that. So at literally every step of the process, coastal communities are often better positioned than Coast Guard or whatever other government agency to take action. So how then can we use this capacity? How can community make the most of it, and how can community make sure that they're getting the benefits and that their community isn't being left with the costs and the damage resulting from this? So we oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that there. So we work to address some specific knowledge gaps on the issue of wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels. We worked with an Indigenous training company called Race Rocks to create an online distributed learning platform that defines WAHVs and maps out all of these processes and lets communities know where they can get involved and how. The training can be completed remotely on a laptop, tablet, or smartphone. Canada's also worked closely with Canadian Coast Guard on the development of community data integration portal. So the portal is currently in pilot stages and it's being tested in I think about a dozen coastal communities here. But once the portal is finalized, it will provide a direct communication pathway between the community and Coast Guard. This will allow the community to remain informed and involved throughout the decision-making process. And so one of the key problems that arises is that a community might report this issue to the relevant agency, but they might not see any action. And that can be really frustrating if you feel like you're shouting into the void. You feel like you're doing everything right, but you don't see any action coming from it. So one of the key aspects of the community communication portal is that it allows for two-way communication, allows for data reciprocity. If the community is sharing their data with Coast Guard, we want Coast Guard to share data with community. We want community to be informed. So we've heard over and over again that incidents will happen in their territory and action will be taken without so much as even a notification. This shared data portal offers an opportunity for communities to both, you know, notify and alert Coast Guard of a risk in their community, but it also allows the community to be informed and notified when incidents are taking place in their community. And it also allows them to track an individual incident as it goes, as it works its way through the Coast Guard system, so that the community knows who to phone if they feel like the process has stalled out. Um, we're now moving into that into the third phase of this. So the first phase was the sort of the procurement opportunity. The second phase was taking a step back and looking at that full life cycle and developing some educational materials around that. And we're now into this into the third phase. This is really one of the key things that I would love for this group to be able to take away from this is that we have been working with a number of government organizations, and we've found a huge appetite for data across government functional groups. So just in this project alone, we've been working with Canadian Coast Guard, Transport Canada, Department of Defense, Environment and Climate Change Canada, many other groups that are interested in accessing Indigenous owned data. And this has prompted a much larger conversation about Indigenous owned data, how it can be leveraged to benefit the community without having to divulge sensitive data that should not be shared outside of community knowledge keepers. Um, One of the examples or an example that I can give you today is that um, Coast Guard considers the impact on Indigenous territory, impact on food sources, and impact on traditional use sites when they're doing their risk assessment. And I think that you'd find that other government agencies are also concerned with these elements. So for our project, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, this particular vessel, it's in close proximity to a traditional food source, or it's in close proximity to a traditional use site. That checks a box that raises the risk profile of the vessel without disclosing the sensitive information behind it. So without disclosing the kind of thing that a community might want to keep within the community. And so when we think about those data systems and collecting vessel data, whether it's with community marine teams, drones, um, remote monitoring systems like the Barnacle, this all creates this now Indigenous owned data. So some of the principles that we've been trying to follow include OCAP, and that's it's an acronym again. It stands for ownership, control, access, and possession. It's a set of principles that guides how First Nations communities in Canada can manage their data and information and ensure that it's the community that's benefiting and not the government agencies solely. The FAIR and CARE principles are frameworks for sharing data that balance open access with Indigenous data sovereignty. So the CARE stands for collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. These principles center on how data collection and research should benefit ultimately the communities and Indigenous data owners that are involved. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And these are principles that promote open data sharing. The thing to remember, of course, is that anything that falls into that sensitive information category, we just wouldn't want to end up in these types of places. So it's just something to be aware of, something to think about. Again, this is so the two things today that I'd like the group to come away with are around data capture and integration, making sure that the community benefits from that data capture, and how to partner with or work with government agencies to potentially look at economic development opportunities that might exist within that data capture and sharing. Um, the second idea is around the legal separation of stewardship teams. So, and that comes with government governance and liability protection. There's a number of good reasons to do this. In our particular program, we were concerned that an Indigenous marine team might go out and place some remote sensing technology on a vessel, and that there might be, an angry vessel owner that might want to come back and sue or take legal action against the people responsible. Without that legal separation from band and council, there's that potential for the community marine team activities or a stewardship team in general, those activities for that responsibility to fall back on the community at large. And we don't want that. But the second big reason that it's important to separate, to have that legal separation for the stewardship team is that it actually makes that team more easy for government agencies to hire. And so this comes back to thinking about economic development opportunities and making it as easy as possible for those teams to generate supporting revenues. So the example that I'll use for our project is that we are actually hiring an Indigenous marine team to go out and do vessel risk assessments in Brentwood Bay as part of this project. We're hoping that through that, we're going to highlight the relatively low cost and benefit to government agencies of hiring a local marine team to assist in risk management that they don't have the capacity to do effectively. So again, if you can take this back to your own community, do you have a stewardship team that is out there that's maybe to develop capacity on doing water sampling or something like that, that you might be able to connect with a government agency that is connected to that type of activity and find mutual benefit. It's less expensive for the government agency to get the information that they want, and it presents an economic development opportunity in the community. This will be my second to last slide here. One of the in discussions with community marine teams, I heard this phrase from a marine team member that they're first to know, first to respond, and most affected. This is really important, especially on the most affected side. There's so many examples where that I can think of in researching this, where the community has borne or has been forced to bear the brunt of the costs and impacts of these events. So on the left is an image of the Nathan E. Stewart tugboat. This is a tugboat that ran aground in Heiltsuk territory. That's on the north coast of British Columbia. That vessel spilled around 100,000 liters of fuel and oil into the territory, and continues. And this was I think 6 or 7 years ago now. Continues to impact food collection and food quality in the nation. The First Nation was first to know. They were first to respond. So they were there almost a day ahead of Coast Guard responders, and they deployed boom, and they deployed they deployed monitoring efforts to try to track the direction and severity of that spill. So just a fantastic example of a community jumping to action, but unfortunately they were forced to jump into action, and they continue to be affected by that event. The picture on the right is a picture of the sunken MV Leviathan 2 This was a whale watching vessel that sunk off the coast of Tofino, off the west coast of Vancouver Island. Um, and just a second here because I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think something along the lines of 20 or 22 of the people that were aboard that vessel were rescued by local Indigenous mariners. So again, local Indigenous mariners, first to know, first to respond, um, you know, and and probably saved 22 lives that day. These are just really great examples of where community capacity is forced to take action and jump into action. But they're in my opinion, they're never recognized and they're never compensated fairly. So Cando's gonna continue to work to recognize all the fantastic capacity that exists on across Canada in this regard, and we're going to continue to work to make sure that these community stewardship teams are compensated fairly for the work that they do. And my final slide here. Just thank you so much for your time. I just want to take this opportunity to invite anyone that has any questions about the program to get in touch with me and start a conversation about how Cando might be able to support efforts in your community. Specifically, we're looking for communities to partner with that are outside of the Western Coast Guard region. So if if you have been impacted by wrecked, abandoned, or hazardous vessels, or even if you haven't and you'd like to maybe explore having a more substantial relationship with Canadian Coast Guard or another government organization, get in touch with me and let's see what Cando might be able to do to support you and your efforts. So thanks again so much for your time, and I'll open up to any questions or comments.
I have a question. I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, this isn't directly related to wrecked and hazardous vessels in the ocean side, but I'm thinking more along the lines of Indigenous people who live close to big lakes. And you have a lot of summer cottage dwellers who live around the lakes. And that's causing a lot of issues with with the bacteria, the fecal bacteria and stuff that's seeping into the lake from the sewers and the houses around the lake. And then the use of the marine, like the boats and stuff that are used in the summertime, but more concern with the bacteria that's in the lake that stays in the lake throughout the winter. People aren't able to use the fish from the lakes anymore, and the water, they have a deteriorating water quality. So what can be done to assist these First Nations who live alongside lakes and use fish as their source of food?
Well, that's a fantastic question, Jerry. So there are, I mean, we've been working really closely with Coast Guard on this project, but there's also Environment and Climate Change Canada that works in this space. So what I do want to let you know is that Coast Guard actually has offices and regional operations centers across Canada. So the Great Lakes is one of the Coast Guard regions. The Prairies, I think, is another region as well. So these issues obviously they might be a little bit more prevalent here on the West Coast, where about I think it's 3/4 of all wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels are, but it doesn't mean that WAHV don't impact every single province. So whether you're talking about wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels, or whether you're talking about hazardous discharge into waterways, um, either way, that is something that Coast Guard for sure would be a great place to get started with the reporting. If they don't know who to contact, they would definitely be able to point somebody in the right direction. But Coast Guard has a regional operations center for the prairies, and is absolutely involved and responsible for managing hazardous material discharge to waterways. So I think that would probably be the best place to start. And Jerry, if you can think of a community in the area that's, that's either dealt with boats, or dealt with hazards making it into the waterway, let's connect and have a conversation. I can do some outreach in Coast Guard, make sure that we're talking to the right people. But absolutely, let's start to have a
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the Lac Saint Anne Lake, and also the Wildman Lake. Those lakes, you can't, the fish are really bad, like you can almost stick your finger through the fish because of all the toxic stuff that's in the water.
Yeah.
So something definitely needs to be done, even in terms of waste management and cleanup, and maybe taxing these people who live along the shores of the lakeside to make sure that this is not happening.
Yeah, so I mean, just out of curiosity, Jerry, do you know if any of the nations whose territories that's happening in, do they have stewardship teams? Are they doing water sampling? Are they like is the community getting involved yet, or not?
They do have some people in place, but I'm not sure how far they got. I mean, I can always check because I do know the people that I work in those areas, and I can check with them to see and maybe connect them with you, and then you can maybe help them and guide them through the process.
That sounds like a great idea, Jerry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the exact type of stewardship activity that is, it involves activities that are being done by other government organizations anyways, right? So I'm sure that there's some level of water sampling happening in that lake, but it's probably not happening as frequently or to the standard that the community might want. And I think that is a really great opportunity to say, hey, you're doing this, but we can do it better. We know what the impacts are in our communities. We know what the specific things to watch out for are. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to take that on, and start start being recognized and remunerated for taking on work that the government is likely doing ineffectively, or dissatisfactorily.
yeah. And then another question: how does the bigger lakes handle the blue-green algae that grows that just blooms and all of a sudden shows up?
That is a great question. Like I know that there have been there have been some massive blooms in the Great Lakes, and other large lakes as well. I have to be honest, it's just not really my area of expertise, so I don't know a ton about it. But again, we are, and when I say we, so we're working in partnership with Coast Guard, and through that partnership, Coast Guard is looking to improve their relationship with nations across the country. And so if there's a community that is dealing with this, Cando might be able to start that conversation with Coast Guard, or whatever the government agency responsible might be, on how to manage it, what can be done, and what the root causes are. Like let's take a few steps backwards, figure out what's changed, what is it that's making its way into the waterways, that's causing these big algal blooms, and seeing what we can do to start fixing things at the source, rather than trying to deal with the effects.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Any other comments or questions?
And if not, if you're maybe a little on the shy side, you can use the chat also. So I guess this would be kind of the last part for Q&A. And if there's no further questions, I believe that would kind of wrap up our afternoon. So speak now or forever hold your peace. Alrighty. Well, I guess thank you there, Ryan. Really appreciate your time. And I found it was really informational and I think really informative. And I think growing up and living in Alberta all my life, it really there's just a whole other world of not problems, but definitely issues that, sometimes like especially right now in Alberta, we're experiencing a lot of wildfires and that's kind of common. Um, but nothing to worry about in that sense. And I think that when you realize just how fortunate we are here for the most part, until it's -40 and -60 with the wind. But there's a lot of different things that I guess from coast to coast that are really I guess pose as risks and issues. And yeah, it's just kind of there's just a whole other world of information and things that really do make a big difference in not only in society, but especially in our coastal regions. So I want to thank you for all that awesome information. I feel like I learned so much, and hopefully everyone is kind of feeling the same, or at least taking a little bit, if not everything, but something from the presentation. And with that, again, I guess, make sure you're filling out the evaluations. They have $100 gift card draw that they'll be doing. All input and any input is really appreciated, really valuable. And with that, I guess, again, just thank you there, Ryan. And I believe that concludes our afternoon here.
I do.
So,
I have
oh, Darlene, yeah,
one more comment. Go Oilers, go!
yeah, and go Oilers, go. The only one Team Canada, the only ones left to represent Canada.
That's right. Bring it home. I'll admit I'm not the biggest Oiler fan as a, a big Canucks fan here on the coast, but let's bring the cup home. Go Oilers, go.
All
Thank
righty.
you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks.